insights and your time with us tonight. I'll see you all when it's time to close. Serena, please take it away.
Good evening, everyone. I am just so delighted and thankful to see all of you here today to learn more about queer students of color and how they see themselves within the anti-racism movements or within multi-anti-racism movements, right? So before we get started, I would love to have our panelists introduce themselves. So let's start with Mariah.
Hello, I am Mariah McCann. I use they, she pronouns. I am one of the panelists, and I am currently a student at UNC Chapel Hill, majoring in African American Studies. However, I did come out of Durham Public Schools, and I previously interned with We Are, and I also am going to be enthusiastically doing some more work with them um, in the upcoming semesters. So yeah, that's the work I've been doing at the moment.
Thank you, Mariah. Love to hear that you are a UNC student. I graduated in 2018. So let's move to Danielle.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle Johnson Webb, and I'm the Director of Equity and Community Engagement at Carey Academy. I am also a proud graduate of North Carolina Central University, and I'm super excited to be here tonight. As it was starting, I was listening to the music and just getting into the groove, but I think it's important for everyone to know I'm a passionate educator for all students and just excited to be here this evening in partnership with We Are. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Let's move to Jasmine.
Hi, I'm Jasmine. I use they, them pronouns. I go to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm majoring in American Studies, but I'm minoring in African and African American Diaspora Studies. I'm part of a community-based organization called CJA on campus that does community justice, anti-racism, and abolition work. So I'm very passionate about anti-racist work, and I am a panelist tonight.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, let's hear from Eric.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric. I use he, him pronouns. And currently I serve as the LGBTA Resource Center coordinator at North Carolina Central University. And I am also a proud double eagle of North Carolina Central University. So happy to be here with you all tonight.
Thank you all so much. So to get started, I guess I should introduce myself. Once again, my name is Serena Fulcher. I am the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity Program Coordinator with the Greater Raleigh Chamber of Commerce. I also was not only a Tar Heel, but I was also an Eagle. I'm working in the LGBTA Resource Center, and I worked very closely with Eric. I would like to go on with our first question, and I'm going to direct that to Mariah. Mariah, how do you see yourself or your identities represented in anti-racism movements?
I feel like I was talking about this with one of my roommates just previously, but I think that the first thing that comes to mind is immediately many of my queer friends who are actively engaged in anti-racism work, like Jasmine, working with CJAA. I have endless other friends that are also queer and doing anti-racism work, especially within UNC's campus. I think about my friends who are, I think, queer or not queer, that are engaged in work with BSM, Black Student Movement, on UNC's campus. I think especially recently, there's been a lot more work in making sure that queer identities are centered in conversations that are about anti-racism and that are about Blackness. And I think that's been really lovely to see. And I also think that in terms of culture and cultures that are Black and cultures that are queer, you see like all those intersections and overlaps, which is like really lovely. And I think that's also where I see that happening.
Thank you, Mariah. I think your answer was very insightful. I believe when I was a student, I didn't see myself as much within the anti-racism movement. So it's really good to hear that you are seeing yourselves and seeing your friends be a part of the movements and having the intersection of their identities included. For our next question, we're going to move to Jasmine. What are the most urgent issues for queer students of color in the Triangle, North Carolina, and beyond?
Yeah, when I first saw this question, I think I thought a lot about it, just because I'm not from the Triangle, but I recently moved here for school. And I think that some of the most urgent things would be the Don't Say Gay bills and the anti-CRT laws that have been passed here recently. I think definitely threaten the way that we understand queer students and the anti-racism movement in general. Queer people and queer people of color have always existed. And the fact that we try to erase them from our school systems and from young people having that representation, I feel like is really, really dangerous. So I think that the most important thing is to make sure laws like this don't get passed and get repealed.
Thank you. Mariah, I would love to hear your standpoint on this question as well.
I think I definitely echo Jasmine in what they've said. And I think it's important in relation to, like, Don't Say Gay and all of those things. And even in relation to anti-critical race theory work, and the way that that often like is grouped with like, or includes sharing stories about queer voices. I believe in the panel from last year, and hopefully someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but Jabari Sellers was present, and he has done a lot of work in regards to like, yes, Jabari Sellers was present and has done a lot of work in relation to like being able to tell stories about queer characters and queer characters of color, queer characters that are Black. And it really is so important that students hear those stories, because I think a lot of, as we grow up, we formulate who we are from like our times at school and all the things that we learn. And I think it's difficult to form a full sense of who you are as a person if you aren't able to learn a full understanding of like the amazing people that exist. So I think it's really important that teachers are able to teach and teach well these like identities and stories.
Thank you. I really think that was a great segue. I'd love to hear from an educator's standpoint. So Danielle and Eric, I'm coming to you. What do you all think are the most urgent issues for students, queer students of color?
Hey, Eric, do you want to go or do you want me to? All right. I to be honest, I think there's so many, right? I think especially with young adolescents, life is complicated, especially the times that we live in. But I really think being seen, right? And I want to piggyback on what Mariah said with faculty, especially teachers, faculty being intentional about what we're putting in front of kids. What books are we putting in front of them? What math problems are we putting in front of them? What scientists are we putting in front of them, and the intentionality around that. Because when I speak to young people, they come to us with the issues and all that, but at the end of the day, I'm not being seen. I want to be seen. I want to felt. I'm a believer that it's hard for schools sometimes to create a safe place, but they want to feel some sort of comfort and that they belong. And so I think as we talk about what we can expose students to and what they need to see, it's the importance. And when I hear them, they want to be seen, and I think seen means respected and belonging and all of those things. But my hope, especially as an educator, is that we're able to continue to do that. And I'll be honest, especially kids out kids of color outside of the LGBTQ identity, right? How do we also work with those students to know that everyone deserves to be seen? So for me, I think when I'm with students, that the core of that is, Miss D, they're not seeing me. Miss D, they're, and that can go along to many things. But for me, that core is how do we create a learning environment that's comfortable and where I can feel seen.
And to that, I would add, just in addition to seeing our young folks, is also listening to our young folks, because a lot of what I'm seeing specifically at Central is my students are leaving high school out proud, is existing as who they've always been, which I think is fantastic. So by the time they get to me and they say, okay, Eric, Mr. Eric, this is who I am, it's my job to just say, okay. And we move forward as such. And I think that a lot of times, specifically in a lot of POC communities, but speaking specifically to Black communities, when we talk to young folks, we try to shelter them away from conversations about sexuality and try to frame it as, I just want to keep my kids away from sexuality in general. I just want to make sure that my children aren't exposed to sexuality. But there's good sexuality, right? There's good ways to have these kinds of conversations so that we are seeing our young folks, but we're also promoting their own education to learn about themselves, learn about their bodies, learn about who they are, right? Instead of shaming them for it. So it kind of softens the blow and culture shock of college, because we know once they get to college, the reinvention happens. And that's great. That is fine. It's part of my job. But I think if we can really tackle the K-12 system and really foster, that feeling of belonging and seeing and listening, by the time they get to me, it can be more of a more cohesive identity development, rather than like, I have no idea who I am, help me figure it out. And which is fine. I will gladly do that. But I think sometimes for young folks, that can be a really hard and really large pill to swallow.
Thank you, Eric. I really think all of the points that all of you have made are very poignant. One of them that stuck out to me was focusing on how do we develop who the person is within K through 12 and letting them be able to embrace themselves fully. And I would like to circle back to the first question, and I would like to pose it to Danielle, Eric, and Jasmine. How do you see yourselves and your identities represented within the anti-racism movement or the different anti-racism movements throughout the years?
I see myself in many ways, right? I identify as Black, I identify as queer, right? I think personally I'm in that. But I feel that as an educator, I'm a 6 through 12 educator, how can we find ways to help teachers progress? Right. And so when I look at myself within this movement, I'm looking at it not solely, but I'm looking heavily through a school lens, right? How do we work with educators, work with families to say, this is work that we need to be doing? And so I really see myself as an advocate. Even though I have, identities that are within this, I really see myself right now as an advocate for this work, and across the board, right? For every type of family, that's important for me too, not just to say it's this group that needs to be in the anti-racist movement working on this. So I would say, 19 years now in education, an advocate, and being in a place where I can ask the hard questions, right? And I also see myself as a mentor, right? I am really big on children are capable. Young adults are capable. So how do we empower them to lead and be leaders within this movement, no matter the age? And so I think right now I'm feeling like an advocate, I'm feeling like a mentor, it's exciting, right? I think it is. Every day I'm surprised. Every day I'm learning something new, because children are like, Miss D, that was 2 weeks ago. So again, I think an advocate, a mentor, and an active learner, right? Because it's changing every day, and being surrounded by young people every day, they keep you on your toes. So I have to keep learning and have to keep growing within myself as well through this movement.
I think similar sentiments. I think I would see myself as a pillar, for the students. What led me to this field specifically is just trying to be what I didn't see when I was an undergrad. And I think that just having some consistency in, a young adult's life makes a difference, especially being in the field of higher ed, because for K-12, or however long you may be in middle school, elementary school, you've had your teachers, you have, your favorite teacher, whether it's your English teacher, history teacher, what have you. Then all of a sudden, post 12th grade, you don't have that anymore. And so when you are doing this identity development in higher ed, like I said, it can be a really hard and challenging pill to swallow. So I see myself as a pillar, but also I see a lot of myself in my students and the student that I wish I was. And I think that that is just absolutely amazing with this generation of college students who are existing as who they are and asking difficult questions and coming to me saying, hey, Mr. Eric, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to see on campus, and, working with them as best I can to make those things happen. And I think that that really makes what I do worthwhile, because it makes me happy to know that even as I age and move forward, in my professional career, too are going to be moving and, leaving their mark on this movement, because we need them, right?
Yeah, echoing a lot of that, because I definitely see myself as like a member of the community now that I've started coming to school here and gotten involved with anti-racist action like on the ground. I definitely see myself as like an educator, as like someone who I always wanted to see. So like freshman me wouldn't be so afraid. I'm a junior now. And I think that if I would have known someone like me in closer proximity, I would have been like less terrified when I first got here, because Chapel Hill is a very different place than rural South Carolina, where I'm from. So I think that that is like a big thing for me. And like, even I am a summer camp counselor. Even being a summer camp counselor, I try to be the camp counselor that like I didn't have when I was younger. So like the one that didn't yell and the one that like was openly queer, because I live in a rural South Carolina during the summer. So I think that, and then like the constant evolution of that role as well, and how sometimes it comes with reframing what you think and what you believe. I definitely feel like I'm represented in the movement in a lot of ways.
Thank you all so much. I really enjoy seeing how you all see yourself represented in the movement. I see we have one more question. What do you see or anticipate as the biggest challenge facing queer students of color? Because this could either be from personal experience or from observation as they work in the anti-racist movements.
Eric, you go ahead.
And this kind of bleeds into what I was going to talk about for my question, so I won't expound too much on it, but I think a lot of what queer students of color, Black students, queer students face is the classic twofold. I'm Black and I'm queer. So how do I function with those intersecting identities? Because it's not the most accepted in my community at home, and it's not accepted, both identities are not accepted to the outside world. So I think we're continuing to have to navigate which one do I choose conversation, right? And both are not tangible, right? We carry all of who we are with us. And I think just from observation and both my own experience, navigating that intersection is very challenging, and is going to continue to be challenging until we can get to a point where we can comfortably have the conversations at home, and then unpack those conversations, and then do the work with, critical race theory and such, because I think, unfortunately, we're always going to have to do double the work. That's just the way that the system works. It's the way the system has been created for us, right? And part of dismantling that is really unlearning the white supremacy that has been taught to us. It's unlearning the ideals of gender. It's unlearning the ideals of sexuality, right? And really breaking the mold at home and having difficult conversations with mom, dad, you know, brother, uncle, sister, guardian, whomever, and then moving forward to using those tools to dismantle the system. I really believe it starts at home, because I have students in my office, unfortunately, who are themselves, you know, from August to December, and then they go home and then they're just like, I have to be who I was before I came to campus. And that breaks my heart, because I'm just like, you've got a taste of freedom, right? You've been living as you've always been. And now for this month of winter break, or these 3 months of summer, you have to like live as someone that you're not. And I think that that is a really challenging part. And then have to also be a student of color or a Black student and just have the world just naturally against you because of, you know, systemic oppression and white supremacy. So then it's just like, well, how do I manage? But I think that really working that out and dismantling at home is part of the start.
Eric, I'm going to piggyback. That's exactly where I was going to go. And I was just going to call it stress, right? Stress, anxiety. I was speaking to a student a couple weeks ago who identifies as a student of color, queer, and neurodiverse, right? And it was the talk of those intersections. And, you know, what rooms do I go in? What rooms don't I go in? How do I navigate it? And what do I mean, that student said to me, like, what do I pick to fight? Right. And so to me right now, I'm really looking at the mental health. And of course, many challenges, but it's that stress and anxiety for me.
Yeah, definitely piggybacking off of that. I'm also neurodiverse. So sitting in like the intersection of all of these identities does create a lot of stress for me, because it's like, where do you even start? Do I go against the racism, the homophobia, or the ableism? Like, there's not really a great place to kind of pick, because sometimes you have to choose your battles with the capacity that you have. And I find myself, especially at larger institutions like this one, picking the less of two evils. So I think that my biggest challenge personally is with interpersonal relationships that I've found that haven't started that work to decolonize their own mindsets, and that kind of those attitudes that I come up against.
I think a lot of my own, I guess, thoughts about this is similar to what has already been shared, but I think a major part of like anti-racism work and just being able to like be a queer, joyful Black person is like to be able to like really just exist fully as yourself in like whatever space that you're in. And I think it is difficult to do that while also grappling with the fact that like it is not the case that you can be fully yourself in every single space and like not always be in a safe space where you can do that. And I think it's difficult and very draining and tiring to be able to, or have to, I guess, manage and constantly be on edge as to like, where are you? Who is gonna make a side comment? Who continues to use only she pronouns for me? You know, that they is definitely first. You know, it's like, how do I, and then it's like, well, she's there. There's always, I think there's so much like thought, and I think it can be very overwhelming, very stressful, as Danielle said. And I think it's important that we have spaces, and that I think that Black queer students have spaces that they can like you don't have to worry. I can be who I am. I can be Black, but I can also be queer. I can be all of these things here in this space, because I think that's also important to ensure that you have the opportunity for self-growth and to have productive conversations that maybe you're seen, and understood. You don't have to maybe explain this thing, or how can you do this and then that, or, there's always like already that understanding. So I think it's important that you're able to navigate that in a safe space.
Thank you, Mariah. And thank you, Brittany, for bringing up code switching. I definitely know that code switching is a constant. As a former UNC undergraduate student, I was in the place that you all are in, having to code switch. I also was dealing with physical disability at the time. So having to deal with that, being queer identified, being African American, and then also being fat, it was definitely a intersection of which one am I gonna pick? So I really appreciate you all bringing up the intersectionality of it all. Our next question is, how might anti-racism organizations or organizations that want to be anti-racist or the movement at large, how can we better serve queer students of color? And to add on to that, how can we create a sense of belonging within these movements for queer students of color?
I can start out with that one. And I think I also saw another question in the chat where Kennedy asked, do you feel you have support from your respective institutions? I'll answer that with a huge yes. But to me, it's intentionality. Thank you for the question. I think it's a great question. It's intentionality. And I can in no way take credit for what I'm about to talk about for my school because it was done before me. But even when we talk about affinity groups for students, some, unfortunately, just because of probably time management, and for us in our upper school, the schedule is so, the schedule allows you to have more than one identity, right? If you decide to go to affinity groups, they're not at all at the same time, they're in different days of the week, right? And that was intentional because again, we want young people to be seen, right? We want them to be able to go to the Christian affinity group and to the gender and sexuality affinity group, or to the Black affinity group and the gender and sexuality affinity group. And so that intentionality is important. And again, I'll go back to, what are we putting in front of young people? The books, it's the little things, right? The math problems. If you're putting up 8 posters in your classroom, did we look at those to see, were we intentional about those? And so, right, that's really in a 6 through 12 or K through 12, that's where my eye is. Where is that intentionality? And I think because we are dealing with young people, we're dealing with, in any institution you're at, well, not any, but in many institutions, you're dealing with a diverse population. It's that intentionality, right? How can we make sure? And that is around ableism for me, that's around socioeconomic. How can we make sure that you, at some point in this 12-year stretch, right? Hopefully it's more than that, but that you are seen, or that, as Eric said, you feel heard, that you have a voice. So I think for educators that are in this group, it's the intentionality. I think everything needs to be intentional. I know that's hard. I know that's time consuming. I know at times that can be stressful. Fragility might say that's exhausting at times, but I think that we need to be intentional.
I think for me, it looks very similar to what Danielle is doing. However, in my role, I don't have to talk about race quite as much, considering that we are an HBCU. So it matters, it always matters, but the conversations look a little differently because now we can really hone in on the intersections, right? You're Black and is what I like to call. And so when we're talking about that and, what are we doing as far as programming? What are we doing as far as making sure that that and is, lifted up? And also, if we're talking about my Department of Diversity and Inclusion, that includes multiracial folks, that includes international students, that includes low-income students, right? All of which who could also have queer identities, all of which who could not. And so when we're talking about your and identity, right, we want to make sure that we are being very intentional about the programming that we're offering, so that when you are here, you can kind of like put one of those burdens to the side, like, okay, look, I'm Black every day, right? You can visibly see that, but what about the invisible identities? What about the invisible identities? Like, you can't physically see my queerness. You can't physically see my disability, right? You can't physically see that I might be multiracial, right? So how can we really lift that up? And so you have those invisible identities, lifted up as well.
Can I add up one more thing? Is that okay? I think also is inviting people to the table, right? Especially in my work, I have to give a shout out. The leader of our PTAA diversity committee is in the room. So shout out to her, because she is amazing and doing great work, but it's about getting many voices, for me and from the I perspective, about getting many voices at the table. Because I wish I was the smartest person in the world, but I'm not, even though I'm a graduate of North Carolina Central University. But to me, it's about the collective, right? Different experiences, people from different places. How can we sit around this table and work to move forward? So shout out to our president of our PTA Diversity Committee who's in the chat. But again, it's right, welcoming and opening the door and putting more chairs around the table. But again, that goes back to the intentionality of it all for me.
Thank you all. Thank you. I really appreciate the theme of intentionality and being intentional about what you are doing within the classroom. I also think that this even expands even more to economic development, because when we have students in school, we want them to be successful after they finish high school, after they finish college. So I really think it's important that we start in school and then even expanding out to businesses so that they can be more diverse and inclusive and creating a sense of belonging, because we want our queer students of color to make these 100K jobs where they are making a good life for themselves. So I really thank you all for each of your perspectives. So we're going to go to our next question. As LGBTQ plus individuals of color, how does the intersection of anti-critical race theory and Don't Say Gay laws affect your experience in school? And how can cisgender heterosexual colleagues and fellow students support you? I'm going to point this question to Eric first.
I've thought so much about this question, and even now, so many thoughts are in my head. But I'll start by saying the intersection of those bans holistically take away it demonstrates a lack of accountability, which is what the creators of white supremacy and the system want. They don't want to be held responsible for their contributions to the system and how the system continues to affect us and is continuing to affect our kids, right? And because of that, right, they don't want to have difficult conversations and be called racist and homophobic and transphobic, because that's the worst thing that these people can be called. And so in doing so, you're then taking away the representation that we need in our school systems, because we have always existed. Black folks, queer folks, Black queer folks have existed since forever. And we've been a part of every movement since the movements began, right? And so with Don't Say Gay and anti-critical race theory, what it's saying to me is, I mean, y'all were there, but not really. And we don't really want to talk about that. We don't really want to talk about your contributions. We want to continue to rewrite your history and teach you what we know, so that way we don't have to have these conversations. We don't have to face the way that police brutality it's still affecting us. We don't have to face the way that racism is still affecting us. We don't have to face the way that HBCUs and minority serving institutions are still criminally underfunded. And then you want us to have these big, large programs for these students, but we don't have the means to do so, right? All of that is systemic. We know that, they know that. And so for me, the intersections of these bands are just feeding into that. And I think what cis-het individuals, instructors can do is be comfortable being uncomfortable, because we have to have these conversations, and nothing good has gotten done with complacency. Nothing. So for us to begin dismantle the system and you to actually earn that title of ally, which they love to put on their bumper stickers, right? You got to show up and do something. It's an action word. You can't just say, I support you, and not actually show up for me. One thing that I talk about when I do my trainings at work is the idea of using your privilege and focusing on the exchange of privilege and power, right? I can enter spaces that, you know, a out trans individual cannot enter as a cis individual. I know that. So when I'm in that room, I have to advocate for that trans individual because they don't have access to the room, the same way that I need, you know, a white individual to advocate for me in the room. And that's where it starts. That's where understanding and asking questions and doing your research, and not putting the onus on the Black person or the queer person or the Black queer person to teach you, right, what it is, but to understand that it is what it is, acknowledging what it is, and saying, you know what, here's what I'm gonna do as the privileged person so that we can have these conversations. And also not taking up space, right? So you wanna be an ally, you wanna have these important conversations, great, fantastic, do so. But look at the room, read the room. What are the students saying about their experience? What are they saying about their lives and their existence? That's where you need to start. It's not about you saying, all right, this is what I wanna do for you, right? We don't want any white saviors. White saviors have been dead. We want action, but you gotta take us with you.
I mean, I was going to mute, but there's nothing left to say. So I'm just going to mute it back.
Exactly. Thank you, Eric. I posted in the chat that the right to comfort is one of the characteristics of white supremacist culture. So it's definitely, you really hit the needle on the head with that one. So I really want to thank you for your response. So if we all are ready, we can move on to the next question. What makes you, and by you, each of you, proud of your entire identity? And how do you nurture, or where do you find joy for yourselves?
I'll jump in. Share that my grandfather's 89th birthday is tomorrow. And I was raised in a household of Blackness. I remembered at a young age that it was just joyful to be Black, right? I also come from a very diverse family in terms of LGBTQ. And so that's always just been in my family, like the norm, which I know is not the norm in many places, but I come from ancestors who loved who they were and who really poured that into my soul, into my bones. And I'll be honest, I feel it, right? I feel the joy of who I am. I feel the excitement of who I am. I feel the confidence. And then I made the decision, and I know I brought it up a lot. I made the decision to go to North Carolina Central University and to be in a place where the majority of people look like me. For, in my opinion, my most formative years, I left that institution with a level of confidence that I don't, I'm like, we're doing it. This is who we are. This is right. And so I do feel, and I'm also, you all can't tell with me sitting down, but I'm 6 feet 2 inches, right? So I know that my parents did a lot for me in terms of put your shoulders back, keep your head high, don't hunch over, don't not wear high heels, right? They really poured into me. And so I have to say, my uncles, all of my mom's brothers are within the LGBTQ community. And so they also showed me, right, that we are who we are, and we walk in the room and we don't take anything from anybody. And so I also have to acknowledge that I was blessed to be able to have that, right, in my family, and have that growing up and be able to sit with those people. But for me, it's my ancestors. It's my grandfather who turns 89 tomorrow. It's the grace of my grandmother, right? If you all saw her last Easter, she had on a full pink Easter suit, right? And so I take, right, and I come from a strong mother. And so I carry them with me. And I carry it in my soul, I carry it in my bones, I can feel them. And that for me, doing equity work every day is hard, it's taxing. And sometimes you have to compartmentalize your identities, right? When you're trying to work with people to progress them. And so for me to have that foundation and to have that in my soul and in my bones, I'm grateful that I was able to be born into the family that I was born into, because they really have poured into me and they continue to pour into me. And I'll give a shout out because some of my friends are in here too, so they pour into me as well.
I think I feel very similarly to Danielle in that I think a lot about my ancestors in a way that I think for me was not necessarily having people in my family to turn to say, oh, you're queer, you're part of this community, even though I know they were there. But I think for me, it's been thinking a lot about, recently reflecting a lot about matrilineality within like Black communities and Black families and how amazing that is, and how I navigate that as a queer person, but still being able to like claim my ties to that wonderful like history, I think has brought me a lot of joy recently. I recently was able to talk to an elder in one of my courses, Connie Stedman, who she was sharing with us a bit about rapping and how her mother taught her how to rap. And she's, I think, like 60, in her mid-late 60s, but she's talking about how her mother taught her to rap and how it was this wonderful, like beautifully Black feminine thing, in a way that I think queers ways that maybe we've been thinking about rap or understand rap to be, in a way that I think is very powerful. In terms of in terms of ancestry, I also think about the fact that like I'm gonna be an ancestor at some point, and how I think, again, it's important that like my, I don't know, descendants, that's weird, but they can like, I guess, look to me and say, wow, like that's amazing. That's a person that I can maybe aspire to, or see this is how that they were able to live their life so amazingly and so wonderfully and joyfully. And like, I could maybe do that too, and like exceedingly and abundantly so, I think is really encouraging and brings me a lot of joy to think about. And I think I was also able to recently reflect a little bit about what that kind of my, I guess, ancestral identity means just broadly. And I think a lot of it is my friends who I'm able to share community with, that chosen family. I have one friend, Steph, who's in the chat, and we, after gospel choir practice, we have our little chat sessions. And, they're also wonderful and Black and queer, and we're able to kind of engage with one another in ways that are beautiful and affirming of each of our own life experiences. And we each mutually greatly appreciate, those times to be able to share space with one another. And yes, I think that was all. So yeah, shout out Steph.
Yeah, echoing Mariah's point about chosen family, I feel like for me, I find a lot of joy and a lot of like nurturing and like wrapping myself in like Black queer love, like radically. So not only to the extent that like I'm around Black queer people, but like I am very intentional about filling my spaces with Black queer people and people who are going to affirm those things about me, and making sure that even if I'm not represented visually, I am represented like in support and in love, and making those spaces. And I think that college is so much about finding those spaces and learning how to carve them out for yourself, because especially going to a PWI where you get a lot of performative support, but not a lot of actual support, you have to be very, very, very intentional and very like clear about making spaces safe for yourself and for people like you that will come and have already passed through. So I think that for me, wrapping myself in community has been really, really important.
I think to Adrian's point in the chat about being excited that, you know, we're all excited about being elders, right? I giggled to myself because I always joke that I can't wait to be a grandpa. Like I'm excited to have kids in the future too, but I really want to be a grandpa. But, you know, there are reasons for that because I just want to get to the elder status, right? And just the idea of like being a queer parent and a queer grandparent is just like, well, okay, we made it. All right. But also being satisfied with the fact that you've made it and you've laid a foundation for your lineage, right? And by lineage, I mean my blood or anybody who is in my chosen family, right? Because we've talked a lot about chosen family tonight. And as queer folks, we need chosen family, right? We cannot make it through without our chosen family, especially if, you know, our birth families aren't the most supportive, right? But with that, for me, it's just I made it through. Here's what I know. I did this, and this. This worked for me. You know, take it or leave it, right? I don't want to gatekeep any information. You know, even now working with my students and they're just like, oh, Miss Eric, what should I do? I'm just like, okay, this works for me. Try this, try that. If that doesn't work, we can go back to square one, right? There's no need for me to gatekeep information because I want to be able to set my young folks up for success, right? And I think that that's what better way to do that than just, you know, being in your lived experience, right? Because they're looking at you just like, well, you did this before I did, so help your man's out. And I'm just like, all right, we'll work through it. And I think that's what I'm looking forward to.
Now, y'all have just brought me joy listening to how you all find joy within yourself. I have personally thought about what is my life going to be like when I do have kids. So, and what type of grandmother will I be? Am I going to be like a cool grandma, you know? Seeing myself as an ancestor and being able to lead any children or little cousins, little nieces and nephews that I have is very important for me. And being able to set up their future through the work that I'm doing is super important to me as well. So one of our final questions before we go to our question and answer is for each of you. If you could go back and give one piece of advice or feedback to a former teacher, what would it be? All right, and we're going to do Jasmine first.
I found this question hard to answer because I want to be an educator and I want to be supportive. I just didn't have the most supportive educators in my life. So I kind of want to be the teacher that I never had. So if I could go back in time, I have some very strong words for a few of them, knowing what I know now. But I would say probably, haha, I win, you lose, because I won. I believed in myself. I got it. Like, I found my strength. I found my courage. I am openly queer and Black and excited to be both of those things. And they didn't kill my spirit. They tried, but they didn't win. So if anything, it would be Nana Nana Boo Boo.
I'll jump in really quickly. I had to ask that clarifying question. I was like, is it my teacher or a teacher? But if it's just a teacher in general, then I would tell a teacher that I worked with when I wanted to be a public school teacher that you just have to pay more attention to your social cues, to the cultural difference, right? This individual, I was in a 7th grade classroom, I will never forget it. And I was in the inner city of my home state, and I was the student teacher working with my peer teacher, and she was this 5'1" white lady, and I am this 6'1" Black man. And all of our kids are Black or brown or Latinx. And there was this one child in particular, young person, who gave her a hard time. I loved him, but gave her a hard time. And she kicked him out of class, and I went in the hallway and I said, "What's up?" And his words were, "She doesn't understand me." And I said, "What's going on?" He told me a little bit about what was going on at home. I said, "All right, look, go back in the classroom. Can you get through the rest of the period for me?" He said, "All right, I got you." Didn't hear a peep. But what I realized now, even as an adult, he just needed to be heard and seen in that moment. And he was fine. The next day or the next time I had class, he was fine. And so for me, it's just you got to understand that this is a cultural difference. They don't see the world the same way that you do, and that is okay. But you have to be mindful of that fact that they don't see the world, and be mindful of your privilege. So when you're kicking the student out of class, right, it's not just because you're disciplining them. They're seeing this white lady use her privilege to kick them out of class and to ostracize them. You gotta think twice about that. Come down to their level and really have a conversation. And again, like I said earlier, be comfortable being uncomfortable. So that's what I would say to her.
I think for me, looking back, and I think I actually talked about this in Dr. Eddie Moore Jr.'s book, I really wish teachers would have stood up, right? I feel like my parents always had to show up, to stand up, and I had parents that could do that, right? And so for me, it's about teachers standing up. I remember an incident younger, and I feel like everybody in the class heard the incident happen, and the teacher was like, "I didn't hear it." I'm like, "How did everybody else hear it?" And so for me, it's, I needed someone to stand for me, right? And my parents did it, but I had to get home 3:30. My mom was working. By the time I thawed out the meat for her to, get the meat ready, then we talked about it. But in the moment, I wish I would have had more educators that would have stood up for me. And so for me, thinking back, I think about that. And I think now, after having this many years in education, I think the standing up is still big, but I also think, as educators, we have to go the extra mile, right? As an educator, I don't know everything about everyone's culture or their religion. I got to pick up a book, got to read an article, right? As a director of equity, I can't be an expert on everything, right? But I need to show up in the spaces that I don't normally show up in. And for me, I hope that my hope is for educators moving forward, that I know teaching is one of the hardest jobs out there, but we signed up for it. And so, what is that extra mile that we have to go?
I think in terms of especially going the extra mile, I think I would talk to a couple of white teachers that I've had. I think would definitely, call themselves allies. They have that bumper sticker. But like, I think often, and it was interesting because these are, white teachers who taught at my high school, Hillside High School, who I think would say that they're doing amazing, like they're doing all of the work that needs to be done. And I think like maybe that there's like no improvement that they can do in the work that they do or in the lessons that they teach. But I think that often results in like doing things that are not as intentional as they may think they are, especially as white people. Especially as white people, I think it's important that they're, especially at a historically majority Black high school, that you're speaking and hearing what your students are feeling about the things you're saying, about the way that you're interacting with your class. about the histories that you're teaching in your class, about the way that you are making space for queer students in your courses. I think it's important that you're always like wanting to make sure that you're supporting these queer students, these queer Black students in the ways that they need to be supported, even if that doesn't always align with how you may have experienced things or how you may have previously been perceived your work to be doing. So I think always making sure that you're not doing this so that you can be called an ally or that you can receive an award or whatever the case, but that you're doing this because you want these Black students to, or queer students broadly, to just live wonderful lives and be seen, and have a wonderful education that they can like recall positively.
Thank you. You all made such amazing points. I think it's super important for individuals, especially within the education atmosphere, to understand that it's okay to not be 100% an expert all the time. We are all in this journey together, and it takes learning, constantly learning, reading, to be able to bring your best self to the work. And I think sometimes, like you all said, while doing the work, some people are like, oh, well, I have this, the pride flag in my classroom. I am very inclusive. I think the best way to do it is to speak with our students, understand what makes them feel like they belong, what gives them, that feeling like, oh, I see that you see me and I see that you understand me. So I like to move on to our audience questions. So for our first question, I'm not sure who it came from, but I'm just going to read out the question to you all. As a parent advocate within the anti-racism movement, how can I help to start the conversation of supporting queer students of color, either for our own kids or for our kids' classmates?
I would say, oh, Mariah, did you want to go? Oh. I would say just start and normalizing the conversation. I think while I'm not a parent yet, the youth that I've worked with and that I'm closely related to know a lot more than you think. I think a lot of times in our adult brains, we try to filter what we're saying to children. And yeah, you want to make it, so they can understand it. But sometimes I've been surprised by my own brother who's throw words at me and I'm like, oh, okay. You know what being bisexual means. That's cool. Right. And so you just have to kind of trust that they trust you and just have the conversation. And if they ask a question, you answer the question and then you move on from it. Because what we don't want is to have our kids run up against somebody who is anti, and then they, get to them first, and then they come questions, and then we have to quickly undo what they just heard, rather than getting it from somebody they trust, and then they do the work to be like, well, that's not what mom, dad, or my teacher said. So I don't really know if that's true, right? Like, trust that they trust you.
Mariah, were you going to jump in? I don't want to step in. I have a dog barking in the background because I'm a dog mom to two barking dogs. I think I echo everything Eric said. And I also think, for families that are in the K through 12, right, it's very different than college, right? Because there's parents who are in charge. And so I really think it's about the education of parents, right? And what kind of events can we put in front of parents? What experts can come in to talk to parents, and really allowing those parents in times to opt into those conversations. Because I think it's a lot of that is about education.
I think that it's important that I think you're always, especially like in the household, just like embodying love in every single interaction that you have. And I think like if you do that, then everything else will kind of come into place because it's like if you love me, then why is this maybe vocalized or why is this perspective said in ways that aren't consistent with what love is and what love looks like. And so I think that if that's central to what you believe that is true, then it'll be natural and it'll come into place without maybe needing to explain your actions or explain, oh, I actually really mean this or etc. It'll just be the truth of things, I guess.
Thank you all. I really love your comment on embodying love. I feel like love is just so important for our youth and especially our queer youth of color. Just making sure that they feel loved and that they see the love and they don't feel that your love is conditional upon your ideal of what you think they should be. So I think that's super important. So for our next question, what affirmations and changes allowed you to blossom as a queer person of color? And what do you have to say to POC that are struggling to be proud of their queerness?
I think for me, affirmations and changes that really helped me blossom were realizing that white supremacy, racism, homophobia, those aren't things that I have to carry within me. The systems are doing that work. I don't have to do that work. I am not a reflection of the system. I don't have to be what they think I am. I have to define myself. And I think that once I realized that I don't have to be who my mom wants me to be, or who my grandma wants me to be, or who the white supremacists want me to be, or who the government wants me to be, and I realized I just have to be someone that makes me happy, and that will reflect in everything that I do. I think that really helped me realize that like being queer, being Black, sitting at the intersection of these identities, and there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it is something I find joy in. And I not only find joy in them, but I like radically find joy in them. I don't let those things come for me. I don't let them impact me. And I know it's easier said than done. Once you realize that it truly is systemic, it truly is a system that is set up to make me fail and make me less proud of myself. Once you realize that it has nothing to do with you, it is a them problem and not a you problem, it makes it so much easier to find joy in who you are. And it just like comes through. So I think that for me, if anything, just realizing that they want me to hate me, so I'm not going to.
And if I can really quickly just take all of those points, Jasmine, and apply it to the identity of being a cis man, a cis Black man, right? That in itself has freed me from so much, because in the world that we live in as a Black queer man, I could go on, but I'll make it short by saying I was born with expectations, societal expectations of what it is to be me and how I interact with this world. And once I discovered that none of that stuff matters and that I could really do what I wanted and be who I am, it put a lot of things into perspective for me and really opened up the doors to really just embracing myself and doing what the hell I wanted to do. Because who gonna check me?
I think, oh, Eric, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think for me, again, I'll say it's hard for me to answer that question because I'm not the norm in terms of the family I probably came from and the acceptance. But when I see the young people that I'm seeing today that are not getting that support at home, I think, Mariah and Jasmine said it, it's the chosen family. And I really, really see, and I have friends actually that I've grown up with, right, that I know I'm part of their chosen family just because of the dynamics of their home, and being able to fill that bucket, right? It's like that friends having them over for the holidays and all of that. We can fill them. And so, again, fortunate enough that it's like everybody's bringing their husband to Thanksgiving dinner at my house or, holiday dinner at my house. But those friends, right? And just for me, embracing them and lifting them up and holding them and having them with my family for a holiday or having them with my family. And so I do think that chosen family has really, really helped people that I know rise up and be able to enter spaces that they never thought with support, with people behind them, with people rooting for them.
I think for me, something that's been providing me a lot of comfort is just reminding myself that I have always been the like amazing Black queer person that I am, even when I didn't know that I was. I think a lot about when I first read Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. And I read that when I was maybe in like either late elementary school or early middle school. And I really loved that book. And I was very much not aware, or I guess allowing myself to be aware of my queerness fully, or, provided the ability to like be aware of my queerness fully at that time. But I really love that book. Like I was just like, Miss Woodson is really speaking to me right now. And it's like, there's a couple reasons for that. Maybe you're not ready to, really come to terms with the fullness of that, but it's like I was always the amazing queer person that I am. And I think that's always encouraging to think about in terms of, now that I am aware, how much further can I go in terms of being my full self, and even just further reflections on who I am as a person. That's also something that I definitely at my mere 21 years of age do not like fully know. And I like, it's very exciting to think about like, who else am I that I haven't quite gotten to yet.
Wow, that y'all gave me chills. Whew, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm trying to figure out a way to transition because that was so good. Um, I guess I can share something that has allowed me to blossom as a queer person of color. The number one thing that allowed me to blossom was actually coming to North Carolina Central University, going to the LGBTA resource center and being with people who are like me. I honestly felt so accepted. I felt joy to be with people who I knew accepted me just for who I was. They didn't have any expectations on what I should be, who I should be, what I should want to do. They accepted me for who I was. And I feel like that's the most important thing for our youth and our queer students of color to feel. So I just really wanted to get that out. Thank you all for allowing me to, step in and say that. If you could give your younger self advice or encouragement, what would you say? And I'm going to go ahead and start with Jasmine.
The question was if I could give any advice to my former self. Okay, yes. So I think if I could give myself any advice, it's to seek out community often and as much as I could. Because I think I didn't value community as much when I was younger, but now I've realized how important it is.
I think I definitely echo Jasmine in like encouraging myself to seek community. I think growing up, I was often told that like, you don't need all the, you don't need all these friends, and like, you maybe need one or two, it's okay. But it's like, no, it's nice to have people around you that like love you amazingly for who I am. And like, and I also love them because they're also amazing people. Not just people who like, oh, I guess you're here, I guess, I don't know. But like to really like allow yourself to be vulnerable and like happily be joyful with other people, I think is something that I wish that I did more. And I think would have let me I think also understand myself a bit more as well in that same way. So I think definitely encouraging myself to share community with others. Um,
I think for me, and I don't want this to come off mean in any way, but I do identify as an empath. And I even as I'm thinking about what I've said, right, and my ancestors and how they filled my cup and all of that, there still was a portion of a imposter syndrome or of a, that I just wish I would have cared less. So I look at these young people on the screen right now and I just want to be like, there's part of me that I look back on some situations and I wish I could have just, cared a little less in terms of that progression and how people may have been viewing me when I walked into a space.
Same. Same. I think I would tell my younger self, hey, it's cool. You don't have to, you just don't have to. You just do not have to. I spent a lot of time conforming and trying to shake off that quote fingers demon for a long time in my life. And when I finally got to the point where I was like, I don't give a damn, I was free. And I was like, great. But I would really just tell my younger self, hey, friend, it is okay. It is so okay. I think that would have made a difference.
And Eric, I think to piggyback off on that, I can say it to my young self, and sometimes I need to say it weekly now, right? So I don't want to, turning 40 hasn't ended the caring, but it's just more conscious in my mind to be like, I think I can move past that.
I have to remind myself constantly that it's not that deep. Especially like that imposter syndrome thing, when like you are in a place where like you do a lot for a lot of people and you want to show up for these people. Like it's not that deep. It's going to be what it's going to be. Like it's the people in my life have to ground me constantly, right? Because I'm just like, what I'm going to do, and it's just like nothing. There's nothing you can do, and that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you all. I definitely want to echo Eric and Danielle in saying that I really need to care less sometimes. Sometimes I feel like I care so much, I give myself anxiety. So learning to not care earlier would have definitely been beneficial. So I do want to move on to our next question. So if we want to dismantle the current system, what kind of educational system do we want to create? Or what would a liberated school system look like, and how can teachers help create it?
I think I'm pausing, right? Because that's hope, right? It's hopeful that we get there. And I don't know. Yeah, to me, it's there's so many things, right, that I could say that we could go in and different beliefs people have on schooling. But for me, it's like the hard conversations. How can faculty and teachers and administrators sit in spaces and have honest conversations, right? And I often say, right, we might not be able to fix everything, but how can we acknowledge what the truth is, right? So we can build some sort of plan. So I hate that I'm not pushing hard on the question that you just asked, but I feel my hope is that we get there. I don't know. But for me, in the meantime, it's about creating an environment where adults and where students can ask the hard questions and have the hard conversations. And that's around anything. And I think through those conversations, right, comes growth and comes something different. So I'm hopeful. I wish I could tell you what that would look like or when it would happen. But for me right now, it's really focusing on having the hard conversations.
I think that's a big question. I think a liberated education system just calls for the big conversations that are happening outside of the classroom and, you know, with the administrators and the instructors, but also is calling for just a change in curriculum, a reformation in curriculum, representation in curriculum, but then also just a place where students can exist unapologetically as themselves. I think a lot of times, while so much has changed since I was a kid and since I was in college, there's so much more room for us to make room for, you know, diverse students, including the invisible identities as well. But I think it just has to come with the acknowledgement that not all of my students are going to, you know, be cisgender. Not all of my students are going to be heterosexual. Not all of my students are, you know, going to be neurotypical, right? Expecting the unexpected so that when you get it, you're just like, all right, I was prepared for this. And even when you get something that you haven't prepared for, it's just like, all right, how do we adapt? Let's go look at the IEPs. Let's go look at the parental documents. Let's involve the parents, right? If the parents aren't available or don't want to be involved, let's find some other resources to help this kid, right? So there are many ways that liberation can happen. I just think we have to be committed to it. And being committed to it means that we're putting people who are committed in, you know, the Board of Ed, and because it all starts with senior leadership. I cannot do anything if I don't have senior leadership behind me. And so once we get that together, I don't know when that will be, hopefully it's soon, but once we get that together, then we can really start the trickle down effect.
Yeah, I just think a lot of like K through 12 especially has to be decolonized. The way that we look at education, the way that we act in educational settings, a lot of it is to feed white supremacy, feed the machine, feed the agenda, you know, not to be a conspiracy theorist or anything, but like a lot of it is primed for just that. It's the reason why schools aren't really big community places. You can find like little groups a lot of the time, but like the support from admin a lot of the time is lacking, at least like in public schools when they don't want to support said affinity groups. You can't really find them. So I think that a lot of what we do in schools is very much a product of Western education models. And once we realize that those don't work and those don't serve every single student, and like Eric said, expecting the unexpected and realizing that the typical is not typical anymore. What you think is going to work probably won't. And being okay with that and being okay with that discomfort and allowing those students to still flourish under your tutelage, I guess.
I think part of what I see is that the teachers, parents, all the people who are I guess involved in like education in school actively see that their children are full people who like exist fully in all the ways that people do. And I think that allows for like them to actually really be listened to be centered in their own education in a way that I think is very necessary, but I don't think often very present. So I think that's what is most important or standing out for me.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I do have one final question. How do you all have any final thoughts or notes that you would like to leave us with before we close out for today?
I think for me, for the educators that are in the room, I think I just love to reiterate, stand up. And, again, I acknowledge that being a teacher, I think parenting, I mean, that's like it's the hardest of the hard. But you still gotta push. And I know many days it's difficult because you're just trying to get all the grades in the grade book and the comments and whose assignments missing, and you have lunch duty and all of this, but you're with these young people. And as I hear these two young people on this panel with me, I'm trying to get up there, right? Because I hear Eric on the being a grandpa thing. They need us and they are looking to us and they need us to stand up. And so I push educators in this space, right? If you don't leave with anything else that I said, stand up. And if you need help with that, reach out to someone. If you need PD and you don't think you can afford it, call someone, right? There's a network of people, and there's a network of free things, right, that you can opt into, but stand up, right? And for me, it's going that extra mile.
I think one thing that I forgot to mention, I don't remember which question it was. I think about like being proud of my identity and ways I've done that. And I think another thing that also relates to like that Black femme wonderfulness is also like wonderful Black Southernness. And I think that's also very central to my identity, very central to my queerness as well. In that also queerness has always been something that has been present in the South, of course, and wonderful and thriving. And so I think that's also been something that's been providing me a lot of joy in seeing how all those identities kind of come together into the person that is me.
I think my ending note is to intentionally like hold joy, hold space, and hold love for queer students of color. I think safe spaces are super duper important, and not only performative safe spaces, but actual safe spaces where we can have tough conversations or just feel comfortable to be ourselves. I think it's so important. That's what's made the best educators that I've ever had, just made me feel comfortable, put material in front of me that made me feel represented, made me feel like I could do it. And I think that representation is key.
And my last note would to be reiterate reading the room, because that is extremely important, especially when you are dealing with the exchange of privilege and power, right? So, recognize where you're privileged and recognize where you're oppressed, and, use that exchange appropriately, especially as an educator. There's always going to be a power dynamic, right? Especially in my role, I sit behind the desk. And so, trying to like kind of alleviate that and making my students feel comfortable with me as an administrator, but also someone that they can trust. And I think that works wonders, especially when there's a racial dynamic there as well. Just naming it like, yes, I am a white individual, you are not. So just name it, right? We see it, right? But a lot of times we don't name it, and naming it kind of like, it addresses it. So it's just like, okay, cool. This person sees me as someone who systemically is oppressed. All right, how can we move forward past that conversation? I think that is the key, or one of the keys, I'll say.
Thank you all so much. I have learned so much from being able to listen to you all speak, and I feel like this is a rallying call. I feel like a lot of people have been encouraged, and I'm just so excited to have each and every one of you on this panel to inform us. I will hand it back over to Sarajane, but I really just wanted to thank you all just for your insight, your intelligence, your time, and all of the contributions you have made to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Serena. Hello again, everyone. Can y'all please join me in giving like a virtual round of applause, send some love to our panelists in the chat. I don't know about y'all, but my heart is so full. My spirit feels so light. Echoing Serena, thank you all so much for your energy and your insights. I'm so glad that we recorded this so that others who couldn't be in attendance tonight can go back and check it out later. What a blessing it is to know and to get to share space with each of you. So thank you, and thank you again, Serena, for guiding that conversation. I also want to thank our team behind the scenes, Sierra, Brittany, Valeria, Rhonda. Thank y'all for holding down the tech and the chat. Also, thank you to Tilde for providing interpretation support. In a moment, my colleagues are going to drop a link to the We Are website, in particular our educator page. Please check that out so you can hear about or register, sign up, get more information about some of our upcoming events, including in just a couple of weeks, our curriculum workshop. Some of you may know about We Are Summer Camp for 1st through 5th graders. If you are interested in learning about what anti-racism looks like in our curriculums, please join us for the curriculum workshop. It's happening in person in Durham, and the registration deadline is October 31st, so don't delay, go ahead and sign up. On November 9th, we will also be holding our Educator Institute Fall Follow-Up. Again, all of this information is available on our website. Thank you, Brittany, for dropping that link. If you have a story that you want to tell, and we are proud practitioners of critical race theory and storytelling, particularly for those who have been traditionally or historically marginalized. We practice that tenet, and if you got a story you want to tell or are willing to tell, consider contributing to our blog. I'll be the person you'll be emailing or talking to about that. So feel free to let me know if you want to submit a piece. Also, oh yes, that's the fall follow-up on at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, November 9th. We'll kind of be building on this conversation in a lot of ways, identifying what's good here and humanizing student and educator relationships. One last plug, by attending tonight, you have been entered in a chance to win a gift card to see Wakanda Forever. So keep an eye out on your email and our social media around November 11th to see if you win. That's really all that I have. Again, thank you all so much for making space, for joining us tonight, for asking questions, sharing your thoughts and insights in the chat. It's been a wonderful exchange with each of you. Have a wonderful evening. Be good to yourselves and to each other. Take it easy. Bye, y'all.